那我们接下来邀请到主办单位和协办单位来为我们做致辞。首先邀请到的是台湾海外援助发展联盟 Taiwan 的洪智杰理事长来为我们说几句话，掌声欢迎。
大家早安，好，谢谢大家这么大清早就来参与这个动，其实我觉得应该先问一个问题，就是为什么我们要参加国际合作发展这样的工作？在从事国际合作发展这个工作，从公民社会的角度来谈的话，或者说原来各国的 ODA 在使用这样子一个资源，主要的其实就是2个目的，一个是去消弭贫穷，另外一个是处理不平等的问题，社会不平等的现象。这个是原始的初衷，也是为什么各国的人民会愿意或是支持他们的政府去从事 ODA 把 ODA 提出去，然后做出一定的比例投入国际合作发展的最重要的一个使命。那我会觉得我们在谈这个就要回到这个初衷来思考这个问题。那再来一个是说，我们已经知道为什么要做了，我们要去处理不平等跟消除贫穷这样子的一个初衷的时候呢，要怎么样做才会有效？这是国际社会长期以来在研究的一个问题。所以有效的部分呢，确实也是就如刚刚罗秉成委员讲的，就是一直到2011年，在这个釜山的那个宣言里面呢，才就更是提示出公民社会变成一个非常重要的一个角色，这已经是全球各国政府的认识。因为当时的那个会议就是联合国 UNDP 跟 OECD 他们共同完成这样子的一个共识，这样。那公民社会其实它里面有一个话我要讲那个英文，因为刚开始其实我也听不懂，他讲的就是怎么翻译他讲说 recognizing CSOs as independent development actors in their own right， 这个在台湾我不晓得大家怎么翻可是这一个概念其实他提出来的是说，他肯认公民社会的主体性，就是作为这个国际合作发展的时候，其实公民社会是一个很重要、不可或缺，而且他们有自己的意志当他们去看到说在地的问题，因为政府当然有很多的 policy， 那是从天而降，可是要怎么接地气，这一个最后一里路就要靠公民社会。那公民社会的角色就变成非常的不可或缺，而且他们有重要的观点需要被听到，然后需要去一起工作，这样。所以等到所以这个伙伴关系在这个如何要做好的时候，这个变成一个很重要的一个观察点。那今天台湾 A 的办这个论坛，其实就在谈说，我们有没有可能回来看一看台湾在这个政策跟公民社会之间，政府跟公民社会之间，我们现有的伙伴关系是长什么样？那未来有没有可能更好？那在这个部分呢，当然我们就去邀请了国际上的大型的平台组织，他们跟我们谈谈他们现在在国际潮流上的观察，然后我们也邀请了台湾的 NGO 来谈谈大家自己各自在实践上的经验。那下午呢，我们就开始从政府方面，我们邀请政府的官员呢来讨论一下说，政府目前的现况跟还有哪些可能性。那最后我们再邀请这个驻台的外管的代表们等于他们从不管是欧盟、日本、法国的经验呢，再来谈一谈说，到底他们对于政府在思考这个部分呢有什么想法跟什么原来他们各国的政策。所以我想今天这个会议是非常的完整而且丰富对于有兴趣想要了解国际合作发展跟我们然后来看看我们怎么可以一起怎么样努力。那今天的目的是为了要形成对话，那如果能够的话，能够有一些共识是更好。那因为台湾 AID 在年底到明年初，我们大概会提出一个公民的一个政策白皮书给政府建议。那将来我们也会邀请大家一起来共同来联署。好，那希望说我们来找出最好的方法，然后让台湾一起前进。 那我们大家一起加油，谢谢大家。
好的，谢谢洪理事长。那我们接下来要邀请到的是国策研究院吴荣全资深顾问来为我们致辞。那吴大使曾经担任外交部 NGO 国际事务会的执行长，在任的时候是积极推动台湾 NGO 的国际参与事务，退休后也仍然和公民社会持续的合作，来推动台湾 NGO 投入国际发展更良善的政策环境。那我们掌声欢迎。
谢谢主持人这么优雅的报告介绍我。代表台湾海外合作发展联盟理事长，还有我们的2位常务理事，还有各位台湾 NGO 的干部跟各位伙伴，大家早安。很高兴以国策研究院文教基金会的身份的协办者的身份来参与我们今天的国际合作发展、政府与民间社会公民社会的伙伴关系的一个现况跟展望的一个多方利害关系人论坛的一个国际研讨会。其实国策研究院只是提供一些 lip service， 所以很荣幸台湾内能够让我们参与，我们感到很荣幸。大家都知道，尽管台湾的国际处境相当的困难，在1987年解严以前，我们的扶轮社、狮子会、同济会跟青商会等4大国际合作联谊的社团，在国际上已经相当的活跃了。然后解严以后，这个公民社会的力量就已经发挥出来了。所以这几十年来，台湾的公民社会都很希望能够在台湾这么艰苦的外交方面能够扮演一个积极的角色。目前台湾大概有2500到3000个公民社会团体，从公共政策、学术文化、医疗卫生、经济工商、科技能源、农业环保、社会福利、人道援助到休闲文化，还有其他。我在外交部的时候，我们跟他分成这10个，我们一一来检视说，怎么样来进一步发挥我们国内民间团体的力量。但是很可惜，我们有几个先天的环境，让我们很难去做。第一个，国内的捐款大部分都集中在少数的宗教团体。第二个，我们援外国际合作发展被污名化。我记得我在外交部担任国会联络人的时候，经常跟立法委员讲，他们都骂我们，你们只是交小朋友、交黑朋友。这个让我们的外交，让我们的大众对这个国际合作发展有一个污名化的感觉，所以让我们觉得相当的frustrated。第三个就是缺少应该有的体制跟法令，这个大家都很了解的。最重要的就是我们这个政府跟民间团体如何来建立伙伴关系的这种心态，这个是相当重要。我也经常跟我们几位前辈来请教。我很高兴听到理事长刚刚说，台湾内今年要开始写白皮书。大家都知道，美国在台湾商会每年都出一个白皮书，他每年都提60项、70项，他们在台湾营商的一些问题。我们的经济部每年都把它当成一个很重要的课题来 answer 它，来 address 它。所以我们的民间团体，我们太客气了，我们做了这么多好事，我们对我们的政府，我们没有让他知道。我们没有让他知道我们要什么，所以这个是其实相当重要的一件事情。国际合作发展其实这是一个台湾有这么多的能量。我们从这次亚洲交流基金会出版的这本书，在2000年有23个 NGO 跟7个医院 在这些国家做了这么多的好事，除了我们提供这些食物、视讯会议、公共卫生视讯会议，提供这些书本以外，我们应该要更进一步的发挥台湾的 ICT 的强项，像这个伊甸基金会，他们就用台湾的功能性的纺织布，能够在中南美那里做烧烫伤那种压力衣的制作，就像阳光基金会不是伊甸说嘞，对我们这个 Rebecca 比我还熟啊。我们也希望说，像平基，他们能够在马拉维用指纹来辨识这些艾滋病病患的病例，然后获得挪威的 Look International 跟联合国来支持。我们也看到像科丁联盟，他们这样子用台湾的 ICT 的强项，怎么样用科技公司淘汰下来旧有电脑，在我们台湾偏乡去推广这些电脑的 coding 的那个程式的这种，他们将来还要推广到全世界去。所以我们很希望说，我们的 NGO 能够跟国际来接轨。像这次我也很高兴看到德国跟那个德国的接塞，跟还有伊甸跟泰国的那基督教关怀协会，他们都一起去做。如果说能够这样子的话，我们就会有很多的国内外的一些宣传的作用。最后，我这个是长久以来我一直抒发在心里面，我一直觉得，今天国际合作发展，这是一个双向的。为什么我们今天台湾防疫做得这么好？在那个 Bloomberg 我们的排名居然是41、42。最近很多朋友都讲，因为我们这么多防疫的好事，这么多防疫的成果，没有在国际的期刊上发表，国际社会不晓得你做了些什么事情，所以这个也是说我们的问题。所以我们很希望说，今后能够说我们的伙伴、我们的同仁，大家能够把这些发挥你们的创意，把这么好的故事、这么好的一些事迹，能够让它转成英文，在国际社会上来发表。那我们国策研究院，我们有一个栏叫台湾观点的一个，很愿意来跟各位合作，来提供微博的稿会，然后用这个翻成英文，让国际社会来知道我们台湾在国际合作发展到底做了些什么样的好事。最后，我还是那么一句话。今天我们要强调，我们要让政府知道我们的这么重要的伙伴关系，我们一定要展现，让政府知道，要展现我们的能量，我们发挥我们的一些创新的能力，让政府知道，非我们不可。这个是双向的。将来怎么样建立一个大家都觉得可行的机制，来进一步来发挥公民社会的力量，弥补中华民国外交的不足，这个其实是各界都相当期待的。所以我们今天很钦佩我们台湾 A 能够举办这个国际研讨会，我希望各位伙伴大家能够踊跃的参与，提出你们的意见，让这个活动能够办得成功。谢谢各位，谢谢。
感谢吴大使。那请吴大使回到座位上，我们现场先在原位，然后进行一个大合照。请大家稍待一会儿。 好的，感谢大家。那我们接下来就进入到第一个场次的主题座谈，主题是政府与公民社会伙伴关系的挑战与契机之国际经验分享。那这场的主持人，我们邀请到台湾海外援助发展联盟 Taiwan Aid 洪智杰理事长来为我们主持，那我们掌声欢迎，谢谢。
Hello. Hello, Sam, Sarah, and Kyo.
Hello, hello.
Oh, so I can see that. Okay. 大家好. This session we are going to use English, but have no translation. And it's my honor to have our three speakers to speak on the subject of challenge and opportunity of civil society government partnership in development cooperation. We will have them to share their experience from global civil society. And we have, I'm the moderator, Jay Hong, also the chairperson of Taiwan Aid. And today we have three speakers. The first one is Mr. Sam Worthington. He's the chairperson, CEO of InterAction USA. The InterAction actually funded in 1986, so they have a 37 years experience as a platform, as this is the largest alliance of international NGO and the partner in the United States. And the second speaker is Sarah Strack. Sarah is a director of Forus International. Forus International is an international forum. Actually, the formal name is International Forum of National NGO Platform. So they have like 69 national NGO platform and 7 regional coalitions to make efforts on international cooperation subject. And the third speaker is Akio. Akio-san, he's a professor of International Development Study of the Department of Global and Intercultural Studies in Farrer University, and also a policy advisor of JANIC, which is Japan's largest NGO for working on international development issue in Japan. The JANIC also have a long history. They've been around for 34 years already. So they have a very experienced and has a broad view on this subject. So for this dialogue, we start from Sam. So let's have Sam to take on the microphone. Okay?
Well, good morning and welcome. It is really an honor to address you, my colleagues in Taipei, and to join my colleagues from civil society on this panel to talk about the challenges and the opportunities that we see in how we engage with governments, and to share some of our experience here in the United States. Let me start a bit with this context of what development cooperation and civil society is like in the US. I think it was mentioned we're 37 years old, but for over 30 years now, the US government started investing significantly in the creation and the building of the international NGO sector. Many NGOs in the US have existed for decades, some go back 50, 60 years, but they tended to be quite small. And it wasn't until an investment in the 1980s and 1990s that we saw this emergence of significant, sizable NGO, we call NGOs in the US context. And it was around that same time that InterAction was established. We started with NGO resources, but significant investment by the US government to get us going. And today we're in essence, the platform of the US NGO sector, the sector of nonprofits that work overseas. We have about 220 members and partners. And to give you a sense of scale, they manage about $15.4 billion, that's $1,000 million a year in resources all over the world. And what's interesting is only about a quarter of that comes from the US government. The vast majority actually comes directly from the American people in terms of support. And we ourselves are funded by our government, but just around about 25%. And they help us to coordinate sort of the US humanitarian response from the NGO sector. But it's important to put us in context. We may sound like we're big, lots of big engagement, but as a part of civil society within the US, we are very small. US nonprofits manage around $1 trillion a year, and they employ about 15% of the US workforce. So you're seeing this enormous sector that's existed for over 200 years, was written about by de Tocqueville, others, and is seen by the government as an essential part on the delivery of social services within the US context. And they've created something, a mechanism through our Internal Revenue Service where we could become a nonprofit, and some 1.6 million NGOs now exist in the US. So if you think of the scale of that engagement with the US government, the part of the NGO sector that is involved internationally is actually quite small, even if we are, in essence, the largest platform in terms of resources, in terms of engaging in the world. But I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the positive work we've done with the US government, and we'll get into that and the nature of engagement. But like anyone in civil society, I want to also just touch base a little bit that there are limits to this collaboration. And as much as we may receive resources from our government and engage, we at times have formally challenged them. We did this when we actually sued the US government legally in a suit on the freedom of speech of US NGOs. That case over 8 years went all the way up to the US Supreme Court, and we won the case. And I think this issue of civic space, of who we are as independent actors in our own right, defines who we are as civil society. And in many countries around the world, we're seeing a closing of civic space and the ability to function. And we engage at this point in time on many fronts. I mean, we have routine engagements with the White House National Security Council, the White House Office of Management Budget, which is the shaping of the US government's development budget and so forth. And we've met regularly with the Biden administration on a weekly basis, perhaps monthly with the previous administration, less so. And this goes across the State Department, the US Agency for International Development, the Law and Challenge Corporation, a whole range of different government agencies. And we do these meetings sometimes with the head of agencies, but less often. Oftentimes it's engaging at a more operational level, but we've had meetings in the White House where we've also met with the President and Secretary of State. On a weekly basis, we're engaging with members of Congress, our Parliament, and their staff, focusing on foreign affairs, defense, budgets, and so forth. And what's emerged over these 30 years is the government officials see us and our members as a way to get new input into their policy ideas, to get feedback on current policies, to determine what practices are working and what are not working. Interestingly, senior government officials are now finding jobs within our sector, and many senior officials within the Biden administration are actually come from the US NGO sector. Our head of policy at InterAction, for example, was the head of policy at USAID. So we have this ability to tap individuals from government. And I think this relationship that we have, this deep relationship, has prepared us in some ways for this massive challenge that we have today. And that's the COVID pandemic. And in many ways, this is the largest global crisis of a generation. All its consequences will be around for generations to come, and they're touching on our economy, our global health systems, on inequality, on food systems, on poverty rates. And this will mark who we are as a global people for a long time to come. And at the same time, it's been an opportunity, and it's been an opportunity to act in critically and radically new ways of engaging, to transform systems, to engage for broader senses of justice and people around our world. As civil society leaders, we've been in the front lines of this response. This idea that we could transform systems, that we've been an ongoing partner with governments, the UN, both to address the pandemic within the United States context and outside. And it's made our concept of being interconnected more real. It's been impossible to ignore. You know, for over months, the disease, and now years, it spread and around the world. It shuttered our economies. It's changed the behavior of individuals. It stopped globalization, and in many ways, for hundreds of millions of people, it's made their lives far worse. And we're seeing the Sustainable Development Goals reversing for the first time in a long time. And we see millions of deaths around the world. And it really is that marginalized part of the world across nation states who are being hit the hardest. And we're seeing them have fewer resources, challenges to the informal sector, issues of emergence of famine in different places emerging. And in the US, it's not that much different. We're seeing this exposure of deep historical inequities in our societies on race and gender and class emerging and re-emerging because of the pandemic. And unfortunately, at the peak, as we're going to this, we're seeing at first sort of nation states, and the US was one of them under the Trump administration, basically retreated behind its borders, retreated to this concept will take care of our nation. And we saw in the US context a complete failure to lead in terms of global resources. And we're seeing that same inequality when it comes to distribution of vaccines around the world. I'm looking to try to get a booster or a third shot in many places where many individuals have not received their first. And yet during the peak as COVID hit, we have seen multilaterals, we've seen the UN, we've seen civil society and all its diversity come together in new ways, and eventually government join us. It's been individuals in government and in the private sector and universities and research institutions, and have all rallied around the shared commitment of what can we actually do to make a difference? You know, how can we develop and how can we distribute effective vaccines? How can we respond with protective equipment? How can we succeed more in getting to individuals who are marginalized and at risk? And we've achieved things that were almost impossible to imagine in a very short period of time. And since then, we've now actively engaged with the US government, and now as the Biden administration came to power, and a global effort to end the pandemic. You know, we work closely with them to persuade them to donate 500 million doses of vaccines to help shape their COVID strategy and their policies around COVID around the world. You work really closely with the UN and at any time in interaction history and in advocacy, both of our government in terms of vaccine equity and the creation of COVAX and the idea of reaching 20% of those outside affluent countries. It's not enough, but it's a start. And at the same time, we're actively involved in trying to fill gaps in access and so forth. And when the US government was completely disengaged in this global response, we pushed hard, starting with the Trump administration and the Biden administration, and we had a crazy idea. And the idea is that the US government should invest $20 billion in official development assistance targeting COVID and its consequences around the world. And at the time, no resources had been passed and everything was focusing domestically in the United States. We launched a major campaign, we engaged, and as of today, some $19 billion has been authorized by the US Congress for the global response in COVID. We find ourselves in a major partnership pushing with the Biden administration to move things forward, constantly pushing on issues of equity and health systems, UN capacity, humanitarian response. And it's been this sort of level of engagement with the US government that has made this possible, and a level of trust and capacity within civil society that we've been tapping over time. And when I say we have been doing this, is not InterAction doing this. It's hundreds of individuals within our membership coming together, meeting with the government officials, pushing of ideas, drafting papers, getting concepts together, in essence, turning civil society into an effective think tank to work with and challenge the US government. And in many ways, we're happy with our level of engagement with the US government. Our main challenge is we have just too many opportunities to engage, and we have only 50 staff. And for us, the issue is less about how much we engage about government, but do we actually have some real influence? Are we listened to, and do things change when we propose something or bring an idea or push back against something? And can we help evolve a government policy and their development approach? You know, in the last couple of weeks, I've written emails to the U.S. ambassador to the UN and the Deputy Secretary of State, number 2 person in the State Department, and the head of the Secretary of Treasury. And the question is, will they answer promptly? Yes, they do that. A couple days or so, it's good we're getting answers. But the real question is, are you addressing the points we're raising? Does this leading into some form of dialogue? And the answer is, it depends. Interestingly, just an example recently with the Department of Treasury, we were watching the US government doing a real mess of pulling out of Afghanistan. And we knew that NGOs were going to be staying, that you had to have programs in Afghanistan after governments were gone, and you had to be working with the Taliban, and you had to making sure people weren't starving, and you had to trying to do what you can to get girls in school and so forth. And yet US government anti-terror policies got in the way. And so we asked a very simple question. If you want us to stay, if you want us to do the humanitarian assistance as you say is needed, we actually need you in very short period of time to change your anti-government terror policies and to give us exemptions and licenses to operate in Afghanistan without having to worry about what the US government is going to do with us legally at home. At first, we got some resistance, we got some pushback. And then I had a very surprise call 2 weeks ago from the number 2 person in Treasury saying, we're doing 2 universal licenses to NGOs, full access, no restrictions from the US government for any humanitarian intervention. We do not want to be a barrier for your engagement. That's an example of a success, though these do not always happen. There have been years when we try and push against something and it does not work. Many times we're simply trying to ensure that resources are available, that we're the champions of the SDGs as it comes to our parliaments and Congress in this sense, that we're able to address key problems like this issue of what are you doing in Afghanistan when you leave for the NGOs, that we can get a voice and sometimes encourage the State Department to engage in promotions of democracy, and other times to push back against the closing of civic space around the world, or at times ask the US government not to be involved and to disengage. And we continue to push, as I mentioned, for this delivery of vaccines to the most marginalized people, both service and others, to make sure that patents are removed, that you can get access to proper medicines. We know that there are several emergent famines around the world, and that these are inevitably in complex environments. How do you get into Tigray? What's the leverage with the Ethiopian government? To what extent is this going to be, or is this more of an ethnic cleansing or some form of broader attack on the people and their ability, and are we starving them to death? And so we get involved in the politics of these environments, which is in essence, in this case, an ally of the US government. Obviously, right now we're involved with COP and what's happening in terms of climate change agenda around the world. What was interesting there, we almost weren't ready for the US government. They wanted so much input from us and so many ideas, and just asking us to please help shape policies and papers. And one of the things about working virtual like this is you can get dozens of high-level officials on a Zoom call engaging with you. And at the bottom of this, we exist not for US power in the world or the role of the US government, but we exist to nudge it towards issues of human rights, to help it focus on at-risk populations, to make it centered on issues of gender, disability, or race, to focus on those core efforts that make this world unjust and unequal. And in that case, sometimes they hear us, sometimes they don't, but we're never going to give up pushing. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Just never forget the humanitarian spirit, and always reminding our government it's not only it's not political power or economic power we are pursuing, or what we are looking at is the people. We really concerned. Thanks for Sam. And the next is Sarah. Thank you, Sarah. It's a very early of you there, right? It's like 3 or 4 o'clock. Well, thank you very much for joining us. Let's having your say.
Morning, everyone. Very good morning to Taipei, and thank you very much from my end as well for the invitation to contribute to this important forum. It's true, it's very early here. It's just before 4 o'clock in the morning here in France, but I really wanted to be with you live. So I'm sorry it's a little bit dark around me. But it's a pleasure to be here with you today. And the topic of partnerships between civil society and government, development cooperation is a really interesting and an important one for us at Forus as well, of course, because it's one that is all constantly evolving and that requires a lot of investment and nurturing, as Sam just explained as well. Because when such partnerships are meaningful, when they work, when civil society is really listened to, then they really have a lot of potential to deliver positive change. We just heard some examples of success, both in policy and in implementation, and both domestically and abroad. And in Forus, as you said, Forus is a global network of national and regional platforms of civil society organizations. So I will talk a little bit from this perspective, drawing on some of the things that we hear from our members across the world. And what we see in Forus is a bit of a continuum of different partnerships with governments, with respective governments. Some civil society platforms have a rather constructive, ongoing relationship with their government, which fluctuates depending on the issues that civil society is pushing for. Others have a bit more of an on-off relationship, and a few are actually also in opposition to their government. But each of these require, obviously, a different approach. And in the latter case, you maybe can't really talk about a partnership, so I will leave that one aside for now. But in all cases, it's really important, and that's what we hear from our members, to be able to maintain access to government representatives while ensuring that the participation of civil society in that dialogue is not tokenistic. And these two things are very important, and these two things have also been affected, as we've just heard as well, in some ways by COVID-19 and by the pandemic. And even though we often see governments boasting sometimes about how much they consult with civil society, but almost as often, this participation of civil society only takes place on, some specific requests from the government, or with little consultation on the important points to discuss, or on who from civil society needs to sit around the table. So even if consultation may take place, sometimes it's actually hard to talk about a partnership. So I really want to focus on this concept of partnership and of the quality of the partnership. And Sam also alluded to that. Because as far as I know, part of the intrinsic nature of a partnership is the principle of mutuality, right? Partners need to have common objectives and be able to both gain something out of the partnership. And in a fruitful one, you'd like each partner to contribute, to be communicative, accessible, and to be driven and committed towards joint outcomes. So as I mentioned, obviously this has been made a lot more difficult in the times of the COVID-19 pandemic. In the Forus network, members in a large number of countries reported that it's been increasingly difficult to engage with their government or their country representatives in multilateral fora, either because of the impossibility to meet in person or because consultation processes were deprioritized on the political agenda. So it's true that it's been really hard work to make sure that civil society can be part of decision making in a meaningful way. Hard work from both ends that also needs to be acknowledged. But it's, as a matter of fact, as I said, since the COVID pandemic hit, the spaces and the access to decision makers in many places has been drastically reduced. And even when access is made possible online or through digital means of communication, we all know you just don't have the same quality of dialogue. And this was also the case, for example, at the United Nations. You know, everyone had to reinvent the way they convened meetings. And for us as civil society, we also have a role in being propositional to find solutions that work from our perspective. So as a response to the situation, which was voiced by many members of Forus, we have embarked on a big campaign to unmute civil society. And we also started to work on the digital enabling environment for civil society, which is one of the things that our member platforms around the world have highlighted as a really big concern for them. Because while the pandemic will hopefully go away, even if its effects will be felt for a long time, the digitalization trend that already existed before the pandemic, but has been dramatically accelerated by the pandemic. And that trend will stay. And what we've seen is that it also, in the times of the COVID-19 pandemic, the digital divide and the digital inequity has been dramatically highlighted. And as I said, that trend of digitalization and of the digital sphere kind of modifying the way that we work will continue to shape also the relationship between governments and civil society in many different ways, and in different ways in different contexts as well. It will impact the way we dialogue, the way we implement activities, the way civil society can play its watchdog role, the way activists can, and civil society in general, can voice their messages, and the way our work is perceived by the wider public. But it will also have an impact on the risks, and we can already see that civil society and activists can face sometimes. So I want to just highlight a little bit some aspects of that work that we're doing on the digital enabling environment. I know that in Taiwan, internet penetration rate is at around 86% from what I found. But if you look globally, around half of the world today is not digitally connected. So of course, this digitalization trend and the digital enabling environment for civil society will have many faces. And in our work as agents of change, if you like, it's important to not only look at this through the domestic lens, but also to take into account how it will shape the way we engage in and with other countries. And again, as I mentioned before, this environment is in constant evolution. It will have many challenges, many risks, and at the same time, many opportunities. And I think that it will be up to both governments and civil society to help shape this trend in a way that is rights-based and in the best interest of people, as you've just reminded us. In the end, that's what we are working for. That's what we want to be in the center of everything, is the best interest of people. So we also need to look at how the partnerships between government and civil society will evolve through that lens of the digital enabling environment. earlier on, I mentioned the importance of the quality of this partnership. So maybe to mention a few more elements that I think are really important to improve the quality of these partnerships. I already mentioned that we need to make sure that the inclusion of civil society is not tokenistic. It's not only about consultation, it's about a genuine listening process, as Sam also said, including at critical decision-making points. And it's also important, especially in development cooperation, that we work towards the ability of civil society to take more initiative to respond to their needs and to the needs that are identified locally. ODA needs to support more projects originating from the needs and from the assessments of civil society itself. This means less tied aid. It means more resources for locally led and locally designed initiatives. It's also, as we heard before, it's also about not only talking with civil society when they're least critical of government policy and action. It's making sure that at any given point in time, those voices of civil society and including those who might not necessarily always have a seat at the table, the most marginalized, can be heard and can be taken into account in the development of policy and the development of implementation actions. But that quality also goes the other way around, right? It also means that civil society organizations need to have their own house in order, that themselves will have to have done proper consultation with their constituencies, including at the local level, and that they're able to bring this and engage with partners, including in technical decisions and in decision-making fashion. And they also need to then be able to follow up on the actions agreed and to be accountable for that. And obviously, so part of the enabling environment for civil society to do that is for civil society organizations to have the capacity and the means to actually live up to this partnership and contribute to the best of their ability. In practical terms, this means having access, as I said, but also having resources, human, financial resources to do so. And not only for the consultation phase, but also to be able to contribute to assess the implementation of public policies, of action on the ground, and to contribute to continuous learning and improvement. So it's really about looking into investing in civil society for civil society to thrive and be able to contribute to the best of its ability. Lastly, just to highlight a few more points before I finish, it's important to come back to these points and think about how they connect with the potential and the implications of digitalization in each of these dimensions. This is both a challenge and an opportunity, as we've heard before. But it really means fundamentally rethinking and adapting the partnerships to a bit of a new era, if you would like. And it's possible for governments and civil society to work together towards the best possible outcome in this. And it means really rethinking the way we also look at the digitalization trend more broadly. Because we really need to collectively mobilize to ensure that the impacts of the digital transformation and on its functioning are positive in the long term. We have to act quickly so that we can ensure the digital inclusion of all, and particularly of low-income and socially excluded demographic groups. And we need the legislative frameworks for digitalization to ensure that they to ensure the respect for human rights and inclusiveness. And lastly, on this point, we also need to make sure, as with the kind of more general engagement of civil society, that there is capacity building also to promote greater digital competency. So this is just a little bit of food for thought on how the trend of digitalization will shape the enabling environment for civil society and thus also the partnership between CSOs and government. And perhaps just a quick concluding reflection. I think we always need to remind ourselves that a vibrant and thriving civil society is in the best interest of government, because by bringing ideas to the fore, by challenging the status quo, by pushing the agenda, that's where we can make the biggest leaps forward. And one of the big richness of civil society resides in its diversity and its ability to connect with each other, to be close to the ground, and to connect these across this diversity, if you'd like. And in that, the value of networks is really important to highlight, because the value of networks really actually resides in as much as in the content that they can bring forward as in the process of connecting amongst each other. And that collective process and collective knowledge that emerges from networks is really based on that ability to listen and to develop a common understanding and to put forward common goals. And so just wanted to finish by saying that with everything that I've said before, the importance of having networks of civil society organizations such as Taiwan Aid is really crucial to drive this discussion forward, because this is where a lot of this thinking and action and positive change can emerge from. So I think I'll stop here for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. Sarah especially talk about genuine partnership and the genuine listening, how the quality of partnership is very important, and also mentioned about the new trend for digital environment. And actually, that's what maybe Taiwan can do more on that direction. Well, thanks, Sarah. And our next speaker is Akio-san, Professor Akio. And so you have the floor.
Okay, thank you very much, Jay. And also, I'd like to thank the organizers, Taiwan Aid and Taiwan Democracy Foundation, for giving me this opportunity to speak. Actually, I have been to Taiwan a lot of times since 2013. I think I was invited to Taiwan Aid conferences several times in the past several years, but I'm very sad that last year and this year I have had no opportunity to visit Taiwan. But I'm very happy that I still have this opportunity to join your conference, although I'm participating in this event online. But I would really like to thank you for inviting me to speak. So today, it's here. Today, I'd like to just talk about an important document that was adopted at the OECD DAC in July, which is a DAC recommendation on the enabling environment in development cooperation and humanitarian assistance. And I'd like to talk about its implications for Taiwan and Japan. So why is this recommendation important? So, of course, this is really the first ever common standard for all the DAC members to partnering with CSOs. And this was adopted as a recommendation. So not only that members have a moral obligation to comply with it, but this will be reviewed at least every 5 years. And also this will be one of the topics in the peer review for each of the OECD DAC members. And also, of course, we CSOs can use this tool to in their dialogues with their governments about the partnerships. So, and also one of the things I'd like to say is that the CSO's key asks were reflected in the finalized recommendations. Of course, the OECD DAC, the work stream which was working on this was really pressured by DAC members to streamline the documents. But still, our key acts were all there. in one way or another. So those were recognizing CSOs as independent development actors in their own right. I know that in the opening ceremony, there was a mention around this. And then secondly, addressing the issues around civic space. Of course, both Sam and Sarah were talking about this. And third one is about emphasis on local ownership of partner countries' civil society. So I'd like to just briefly talk about the process. Of course, the DAC members have started partnering with CSOs, the early ones in 1960s and early 1970s. And Japan was very late in this. They started partnering with CSOs in 1989. But anyway, because of that, OECD has always published reports on NGO CSO partnerships since, as far as I know, since early 1980s. But for this round, in October 2017, a work stream was established in OECD Secretariat. 2018 to 19, there was a survey conducted to all DAC members, and all of them responded. And in June 19, the first working paper came out. And then in April 2020, this document came out. This was the surveys, and also it included action points, which became the basis for the recommendation. And the process of the first draft was circulated in October last year. There were only 10 days for us to discuss. So there is a group named DAC CSO Reference Group, which is a platform for a dialogue with CSOs. I forgot to talk about this. But anyway, the reference group established a task force, and in 10 days, we gave some feedbacks to them. In February this year, the second draft was circulated, but this was among DAC members only and not to CSOs. Then on April 8th, the third draft was shared among members and also the reference group. So we circulated to our CSOs friends around the world, and there was a task force organized with Brian Tomlinson of Canada, who coordinated, and I was also a member. So the draft was circulated among the members, our CSO colleagues around the world, and also there were 18 feedbacks from CSOs and platforms around the world. So we put together this. This was we had to do it in a very short time, but we were able to submit what's called the consolidated proposals from 18 CSOs and CSO platforms in early May. And this document was endorsed by 47 CSOs. I think Taiwan 8 was one of them. And then the final draft, which unfortunately was not shared to us, but was circulated among the members, we sent a joint CSO letter with key ask on June 24th. And on July 6th, the recommendation was adopted. And also there were rumors that a few DAC members would not adhere to it, would opt out. But fortunately, this did not happen and was adhered to by all the DAC members. So I'd like to just pick out a few points from the preamble. CSOs were recognized both as independent development actors in their own right, and also development cooperation partners of the DAC members. And also while we talk about the diversity of civil society, and also their important roles in the 2030 agenda, and also they talk about all the human rights context and COVID-19 context, and also there are several paragraphs on recognizing, pointing out all the civic space issues, which was also raised by Sam and Sarah. And also, maybe I will skip this one. So the recommendation have 3 pillars. One is respecting protecting and promoting civic space. So it was really a surprise that this became the first pillar in the final draft and also the final recommendation. In the first draft, it was the third pillar, but I think this is a reflection that some of the DAC members took the civic space issue very seriously, that this was moved up to the first pillar. And the second pillar, this was really a practical pillar on how to support and engage with civil society. And third one, this is actually pointed to us, we should think, but incentivizing CSO effectiveness, transparency, and accountability. So for the first pillar on civic space, the first paragraph talks about developing clear policy positions by all the DAC members on the civic space issue. The second one is about having a dialogue with the partner countries on the civic space issue. The third paragraph is about coordinating among providers and also international and regional organizations on civic space issues. The fourth one, take reasonable steps to do no harm to civic space in partner countries or territories. This was a bit surprising because this wasn't even in the final draft, but we proposed a similar paragraph to be added, and this was taken. So we were very happy to see this paragraph. And then five, this is engaging with different bodies on civic space issues. Sixth one is to support partner countries' capacities on civic space issues. The seventh paragraph is, maybe I will talk about the eighth, counter mis and disinformation or harassment, discrimination, anti-democratic narratives targeting civil society. So the last two paragraphs under this pillar, this was about digital enabling environment, which Sarah was talking about. And so I will move to the second pillar, supporting and engaging with civil society. So this pillar also starts again with a paragraph on establishing in consultation policy frameworks on civil society partnerships by the DAC members and all the adherents. So it must articulate objectives for partnering with civil society. Also, it should aim to strengthen local ownership, and also it should take into account all the civic space issues. And also, this should be integrated into wider development cooperation policies and strategies. The second one, this is to pursue. That DAC members should pursue civil society actors' active participation in policy making, including structured, institutionalized, inclusive, and accessible dialogue. The third pillar, this is about how to provide financial support. They talk about increasing the availability of flexible and predictable support, core support or program-based support. We wanted but they did it and or. The fourth is about how to promote the leadership of local civil society society in partner countries and territories. And so they also again talks about availability, accessibility of flexible funding mechanisms, including core and program-based support, and also supporting civil society networks platforms in the global south in partner countries, and also ensuring the local civil society actors to be involved in policy making. The fifth one is about supporting partnering with a wide range of civil society actors, not only the NGOs. The sixth paragraph talks of streamlining administrative requirements. And also seventh paragraph talk about enhancing transparency and information in the partner countries level on funding to civil society. 8 is about promoting global citizen education and also for inclusive sustainable development. And ninth, this is about aligning this recommendations with the two recommendations already adopted on by the DAC. One is about the humanitarian development peace nexus, and also second one is about ending sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment. And maybe I will skip the 10th. And then the third pillar is about incentivizing CSO effectiveness, transparency, and accountability. First one is call on to support voluntary CSO efforts. I think this practically means about implementing Istanbul principles from our side. The second one is asking CSOs to develop their own standards to meet international human rights standards. Third one is to support the CSOs mutual capacity strengthening and capacity building. Fourth one is about supporting more equitable partnerships. This is very important issue because this has very an important issue raised by our friends in the Global South. And also fifth one is to promote participatory and right-based approaches by CSOs. Sixth one is about fostering innovations by CSOs. Seventh one is about CSOs voluntary collaborations and coordination among themselves. Maybe eighth one is a bit tricky because it asks for CSOs to comply with local legal and regulatory requirements. Although of course there is reservations on the human rights situation, but eighth one is a bit tricky for us. So what are the next steps? Of course, first one is to socialize the recommendations. And actually the community of practice on civil society or OECD in the OECD DAC will work on toolkits, but this is unlikely to happen until December. And then maybe we should by ourselves consolidate good practices. And also this will be the recommendation will be integrated in the peer review process. So how CSOs would be engaged, it's really critical. And so what are the donor countries CSOs should do? Maybe socializing the recommendations, the policy works to have a dialogue with their government and also to change our country practices, and also mutual learning on good practices. So, and also we should really understand that periodically this is pointed out to so we should improve our effectiveness, transparency, and accountability. So what are the challenges for us? Japan is the second lowest among the DAC members in aid for CSOs. It's 15% for in DAC total, but only 1.6% for Japan. So for Greece, it's absolute zero, but Japan is second from the rest. So we should change this. And also Japan has no independent CSO policy framework. Japanese government has little will to address the civic space with the partner countries. And also, how to support and have policy dialogue with partner countries. CSOs is another issue. We don't have core and program-based funding. And also, there are several other things that we have to improve our own effectiveness, transparency, and accountability. So I'd like to change, end my presentations by pointing out what are the challenges for CSOs in Taiwan. Of course, it is my friends in Taiwan to decide how they could use the recommendations in their dialogue with MOFA and ICDF. But of course, I know that in the new southbound policy by the Taiwanese government, the role of civil society is emphasized. So this is really a good opportunity. So I will just say some options which my friends could choose from them. But one is, of course, ask Taiwanese government to enhance their partnering with CSOs. And also, maybe our CSO friends in Taiwan and their government government counterparts could have a joint learning about the other donors' good practices. Another thing you can ask the government is to have a policy framework on partnering with CSOs, and also funding schemes with the third paragraph in the second paragraph in mind. And also, even one thing you can ask the Taiwanese government is to become one of the adherents of the recommendation. At this moment, I confirmed this with the OECD, my friend in OECD, but at this moment, all the adherents are DAC donors. But they're talking with some Latin American non-DAC OECD members to be adherents, and also I received a confirmation that this recommendation is open to any bilateral or multilateral donors to adhere to it. So Taiwan could adhere to it. So these are the things that you can choose to choose what to dialogue with your government. So I'd like to stop now. Sorry, I spoke a little bit over time, but I'd like to really thank this opportunity. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Akio. In the end, he also have a very concrete recommendation for us, and he talked about the OECD DAC, how they partnership with NGO and CSO, and have a very concrete recommendation. That's a very new, recently just issue. And now we have original we have time to 10:30, so we only left 5 minutes left. So I will ask our speaker, can you give us 5 more minutes, so we have 10 minutes to communicate with the audience, and we'll have some question from the audience. And before that, I have a question for you. And that is my request is if you got the opportunity to meet Taiwan, the highest decision policy-making person, what question will you ask them? Or what kind of question you will raise to them? That's my question for you. Oh, well, so at the end, maybe you can give us some of their thought. So that will give you think about that. And before answer my question, I will open the floor to the audience. So yes, please. Is that microphone working?
Yes. Hello, Dr. Akio and Mr. Sam and Ms. Sarah. Thank you for your presentation today.
And introduce yourself first.
My name is Hui. I just graduated from the university in Sweden, and I wrote my thesis about how civil society groups can partner well with the government in order to solve the refugee crisis. I want to ask you that because I heard from your sharing that a successful partnership between CSO and government sometimes depends on the government's interest in civil society work. Take the USA's context, for example, the government wants to seek inputs from the CSOs in order to shape better foreign policy. But from Sarah's sharing, I also hear that it's important to have the assets with the government and to keep the listening process working. So in that case, it also means that the civil society needs to raise their position as high as the government so that they can negotiate something better for themselves, for their agenda. So I just want to ask you that in your team, how much you emphasize personnel's capacity in policy advocacy and at the policy interpretation, because I'm thinking for many organizations in Taiwan, probably they would like to take on more people who have the skill sets of agriculture, digitalization, or economic backgrounds, but really for people who have interdisciplinary background like policy, political science, international relations, etc. So I would like to ask you this question. Can you deliver on that a little bit more? Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Allow me to collect 2 or 3 more questions, then we will answer them collectively. Okay. All right. So, any other questions? Yes, please.
Okay. I'm Yichen Wu, a PhD from National Taiwan University Sustainable Development Program. I have one question for Sam and Sarah. And in the case of Taiwan's NGO dedicated to foreign aid, actually most of us are actually domestic NGO, or most of the service are for domestic people, and the international service is just one branch. And also the World Value Survey shows that Taiwan or the East Asia people don't care about global poverty compared with the North American and Western Europe. So the problem at the further official NGO cooperation will be that the public awareness is not enough. That people will ask us, why do you still send money abroad and not help Taiwanese people ourselves? So how to solve this kind of problem to persuade people for further official NGO cooperation through public education, for street dialogue, or the directly political agenda with some certain political party? And another question is for Dr. Takunagi. You mentioned about the OECD recommendation. And actually, the DAC member has a peer review for each DAC member every 3 to 5 years, that they will send country experts to each donor to examine the ODA policy, right? Although Taiwan is not an OECD member, but is it possible that we have a human rights periodic review, like directly bring the human rights expert to Taiwan to do the pseudo periodic review of human rights? It is possible to invite some OECD member to come here to do the peer review for Taiwan's ODA, and then open a dialogue between NGO and government about certain policy abroad or for further cooperation. Or more practically, if you are one of the country experts to visit us, what is the most suggesting thing you can do or you want to suggest for the CSO or the government? Thank you.
Well, thank you. There's so many questions. Okay. The last one. Okay. Huh?
Hello, my name is Linus Lee. I'm from the Node of Craniofacial Foundation, Taiwan. Thank you so much for the great presentation. I have a very short question. So in your, the question is for Sam and Sarah. So in your experience to work with to negotiation with the government sector, what is the most practical strength of NGO to leverage and to persuade the government sector to align with NGO's agenda? Thank you.
Question. So who want to answer that? You, Sam first.
In reverse order, the most practical sense, I've been in negotiations with ambassadors, others. Our biggest strength is our ability to think, and to think out of the box, to give different ideas, and to bring a perspective that is different. And so I think that's one key thing that we bring to negotiations. The great questions of why should I give abroad? And we've had this challenge in the US. The reality in the US, only about 4% of private giving goes outside the US. The rest is domestic. So our answer is do both. Give domestically, engage domestically. But we've also made this about values, that this is about us as a people, that our caring about this is about us as a people. So we've made it an identity question. And I think we've been able to do that over time. On the question of capacity, we've had to, in essence, get top level capacity from other sectors. We've got individuals who worked on Congress. We've got top people from the Treasury Department. I mentioned USAID. So we have hired individuals whose backgrounds are in policy and the development of policy and the understanding of policy, because that helps us with our ideas to be more practical in terms of policy framework. And I'll end with your what would I say to your government? And my answer would be, it's not me or us to say something to your government, but my question would be to them, how do you engage Taiwanese NGOs? Why are you engaging them? And can you do more with them as you engage them? Because I think you will be much stronger if you do so.
Thank you, Sam. That's a great answer. Next, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you very much for these questions. I will also take them in reverse order and build on what Sam said, which I very much share. I think, it's in terms of how to persuade people in the government sector on the strengths of civil society. I think it's also reminding that we can be that link to what their policies mean on the ground, and that reminding also government representatives that they should work in the best interest of the people, that they're oftentimes elected representatives of the people. So that, it needs to, the work that they do need to be in the benefit to the people on the ground, and we can translate, help translate what that means. On the second question, again, I really agree with what Sam said. To me, coming back to the question about identity, it's also about being able to create spaces for more storytelling from people who are impacted on the ground, so that the what happens becomes very much concrete and reminds us about the human face that all of the things that we work for have. In terms of the capacity and making sure that we can kind of harness that capacity that we need to be impactful, this for me comes back to the strength of working in collectives or in networks. It's because there you can really harvest the collective knowledge, the collective capacity, and bring that together. And of course, no one single person can have technical expertise in so many different areas, but when we connect the expertise that resides in the collective, I think this is where we can have most impact. And on the question to the Taiwan official, again, I had something similar in mind to what Sam said, but I would also want to bring others with me from other places so that they can talk directly from their experience and ask their question from their experience.
And next, Akio.
Okay. Thank you very much for all the questions. I think because of the time, I will just respond to two questions. One was by Yi Chen, who is actually a close friend of mine. We met several times in Taiwan. But for the OECD, the peer review, I don't think non-DAC members was ever peer reviewed. So I'm not sure whether there is a chance for Taiwan to be peer reviewed before joining the OECD DAC. But also true, and also I should note that OECD DAC, they expanded their membership in the past decade. So they now have 30 members, 29 countries and the EU. So I don't think they have the capacity to review a country outside OECD DAC. But one thing that is already happening is that non-DAC members are participating in peer reviews as observers to learn from other countries' experiences. So maybe you can ask the Taiwan government whether they can join the peer review team as an observer to see how peer review goes, and also what are the real important points in peer review. So then going back to Jay's big question, I have similar points with Sam and Sarah, but and also of course the people in Taiwan have the ownership about the dialogue with the Taiwanese government. But if I would have a chance to sit together with you, I think one of the points I would like to raise is that now that we have this kind of a common standard on partnering with CSOs, what is the Taiwanese plan to comply with it, or maybe refer to these recommendations, and maybe based on this recommendation, establish policy frameworks and also funding schemes around this. Of course, Taiwan has already been reporting their aid statistics to the OECD DAC. This makes a real difference in development cooperation from Beijing. And also, if Taiwan would try to align many of the development cooperation policies and practices with those around the OECD standards, I know that this is very good for Taiwan's reputations around the world. So I would suggest that. I hope this has the answers to the questions from Yi-Chen and Jay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Theo. Sam and Sarah, it's a very appreciate your participation or this meeting, and thanks for all. And we'll take a rest for 10 minutes, and we'll have a photo together. Okay, so so just say hi to the audience. We have a group photo.
Very much.